All prisoners to be executed in 2025. U.S. death row execution list. Every prisoner scheduled for execution in the U.S. 2025. A true crime documentary. In today's video, we present a comprehensive compilation of individuals scheduled to be executed in the United States during 2025. This is a topic that provokes deeply divided opinions, as it touches on legal, ethical, and emotional realities. We will approach it with the seriousness and respect it deserves, strictly from an educational and documentary perspective, and in accordance with YouTube's guidelines. Capital punishment has long been a central issue in debates about justice in the United States. While 23 states have abolished the death penalty, 27 states still maintain it, along with the federal and military justice systems. However, it is not applied arbitrarily. The Eighth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment, restricting the death penalty to specific circumstances, most often cases involving aggravated murder committed by mentally competent adults. As of 2025, 13 executions are scheduled across several states, including Texas, Alabama, Florida, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Ohio. Many of the individuals featured today have spent decades on death row. On average, more than 13 years pass between a death sentence and execution in the United States. With that context in mind, let us begin. Marion Bowman Jr. State, South Carolina offenses: murder, arson, third degree, execution date, January 31st, 2025. On February 16, 2001, 20-year-old Marion Bowman Jr. became involved in a dispute with 21-year-old Candy Louise Martin over a money debt. What followed was a calculated and violent crime. Bowman shot Martin multiple times in a wooded area, dragged her body to a car, placed her in the trunk, and drove to a remote location where he set the vehicle on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Witnesses testified that Bowman had threatened Martin earlier that day, stating she would be dead before nightfall. Bowman's cousin later testified that the crime was planned and that Bowman openly bragged about the murder afterward. Investigators recovered the murder weapon from a river, linking it to Bowman through ballistic and DNA evidence. In 2002, Bowman was convicted and sentenced to death. He has consistently maintained his innocence, claiming prosecutorial misconduct and racial bias during his trial. Despite decades of appeals, his sentence was upheld. His final appeals were denied in 2022. Marion Bowman Jr., now 44, is scheduled for execution on January 31st, 2025. Stephen LaWayne Nelson. State, Texas offenses: capital murder, assault, execution date, February 5th, 2025. On March 3rd, 2011, Stephen Nelson entered North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas, intending to commit robbery. Inside were Pastor Clint Dobson, 28, and Church Secretary Judy Elliott, 69. Nelson brutally attacked both victims. Pastor Dobson was beaten, strangled with a computer cord, and suffocated with a plastic bag. Judy Elliott was severely beaten, suffering brain hemorrhaging and facial fractures, but survived after extensive medical treatment. Nelson fled with stolen items, including credit cards and a vehicle. He was quickly linked to the crime through fingerprints and blood evidence. Convicted of capital murder, Nelson was sentenced to death. He is scheduled for execution on February 5th, 2025, at the age of 37. Demetrius Terrence Frazier. State, Alabama offenses: rape, murder, execution date, February 6th, 2025. In November 1991, Demetrius Frazier broke into the apartment of 40-year-old Pauline Brown in Birmingham, Alabama. He raped her at gunpoint before killing her and stealing money. Months later, in Michigan, Frazier murdered 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick during an attempted sexual assault. He later confessed to both crimes. Frazier received a death sentence in Alabama and a life sentence in Michigan. In 2018, he chose nitrogen hypoxia as his method of execution. Demetrius Terrence Frazier, 52, is scheduled to be executed on February 6, 2025. James Dennis Ford. State, Florida offenses: murder, sexual assault, child abuse, execution date, February 13, 2025. In 1997, James Ford murdered Greg and Kimberly Malnery after luring them on a fishing trip. Greg was shot and later killed with an axe. Kimberly was brutally assaulted, raped, and murdered. Their 22-month-old daughter was left alone in a van for over 18 hours, covered in her mother's blood. Ford was convicted and sentenced to death in 1999. After years of appeals, his execution was authorized in 2025. James Dennis Ford, 64, will be executed on February 13, 2025. Richard Lee Tabler. State: Texas offenses. Multiple murders execution date: February 13, 2025. In November 2004, Richard Lee Tabler murdered nightclub manager Mohammed Ramzan and another man in Killeen, Texas. Days later, he murdered 2 teenage girls he believed had implicated him. Tabler taunted police, recorded crimes, and later confessed before recanting. He was convicted of 4 murders and sentenced to death in 2007. Richard Lee Tabler, 45, is scheduled for execution on February 13, 2025. David Leonard Wood. State: Texas offenses. Serial murder execution date: March 13, 2025. Between 1987 and 1988, multiple young women disappeared in El Pozo, Texas. David Leonard Wood was arrested after abducting and assaulting one victim, leading investigators to uncover evidence linking him to at least 6 murders. Wood was convicted in 1992 and sentenced to death. David Leonard Wood, 67, is scheduled for execution on March 13, 2025. Wendell Arden Grissom. State: Oklahoma. Offenses: murder, attempted murder execution date: March 20, 2025. In 2005, Wendell Grissom and an accomplice randomly selected a home to burglarize. Grissom murdered Drew Carey and Amber Matthews, who was attempting to protect children. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Clemency arguments citing brain damage have been denied. Wendell Arden Grissom is scheduled for execution on March 20, 2025. Moses Sandoval Mendoza. State: Texas offenses. Capital murder execution date: April 23, 2025. In 2004, Moses Mendoza strangled a 20-year-old woman, attempted to destroy her body, and buried her remains. He was convicted in 2005 and sentenced to death. Appeals were denied. Moses Sandoval Mendoza, 40, will be executed on April 23, 2025. Percy Hutton. State: Ohio offenses. Capital murder. Execution date: June 18, 2025. In 1985, Percy Hutton murdered Derek Mitchell and attempted to murder Samuel Simmons Jr. after believing he had been robbed. After spending over 35 years on death row, his execution is now scheduled for June 18, 2025. Samuel Morland. State: Ohio offenses. Multiple murders execution date: July 30, 2025. In 1985, Samuel Morland murdered 5 people, including children, in a family home in Cleveland. Convicted in 1986, all appeals have since been denied. Samuel Morland, 63, will be executed on July 30, 2025. Douglas Coley. State: Ohio offenses. Murder, kidnapping execution date: September 24, 2025. Douglas Coley kidnapped and attempted to murder one victim before later killing Samar L. Oakley. Despite appeals, his execution remains scheduled for September 24, 2025. Timothy Coleman. State: Ohio offenses. Aggravated murder execution date: October 30, 2025. In 1996, Timothy Coleman murdered confidential police informant Melinda Stevens to prevent her testimony. He was convicted and sentenced to death the same year. Kareem M. Jackson. State: Ohio offenses. Multiple murder, robbery. Execution date: December 10, 2025. In 1997, Kareem Jackson participated in a home invasion robbery that resulted in the execution-style murder of 2 victims. He was sentenced to death and is scheduled for execution on December 10, 2025. These are the individuals scheduled for execution in the United States in 2025. While this video has presented these cases in a summarized format, future episodes will explore each case in greater depth. As we examine these events, it is essential to reflect on the broader implications, justice, accountability, and the consequences of human choices. Thank you for watching. We invite you to continue reflecting on these cases and their impact on society.